On behalf of Rock Creek Park, I would like to welcome you all to tonight's webinar. We're very excited about the Race and History series, and it's been going very well. And we plan to keep going ad infinitum. I don't think it's ever going to have an end. And we're grateful to the Rock Creek Conservancy for sponsoring tonight's event and managing tonight's event. And we're also grateful to our other partners, many of whom have also participated in the Race and History series. And we're glad to have them as our partners. We can't get anything done in Rock Creek Park without our partners, and we're grateful for all of them. So on behalf of the park, welcome tonight. I hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Julia. And we obviously could get nothing done as Rock Creek Conservancy, the philanthropic and stewardship partner of Rock Creek Park, without you and your amazing team at Rock Creek Park. And having had the chance to speak with you and Tara and Mrs. Ellard, I know you stand on the shoulders of giants, and we're so fortunate to talk to many of them tonight. We're thrilled to have many of Conservancy board members who provide leadership to this organization here tonight, as well as many of the park partners. And I see some of the National Capital Parks East park partners with us as well. So we're delighted to have all of you with us. I am going to, in just a moment, introduce the rest of our speakers. As we are having this conversation, we invite you to, I see Mrs. Ellard's fan club has already found the chat room, the chat function. Please feel free to leave comments, but also to ask questions that we will get to as we work our way through the discussion this evening. Again, we do ask that you stay on mute, and this program is being recorded, so you'll also have the chance to revisit it as we proceed. One of the things that I personally love and value about Rock Creek Park, besides its natural beauty and its, I think, iconic place both in the National Park Service and the DC region, is the really wonderful leadership that allows it to be such a dynamic little park in the National Park Service. It's the third national park established and the first urban national park. So it is no surprise at all that it has had incredible and trailblazing leadership. We're incredibly fortunate, as I said, to have Julia with us. And just by way of quick introduction, Julia is not just the current superintendent of the National Park Service. She's a former associate director of the National Park Service nationwide, and we're incredibly lucky that she's chosen to come back to, I think I can safely say, her home park in Rock Creek to lead and lead operations here. We're also joined this evening by Tara Morrison, who is Julia's predecessor and is now the superintendent at National Capital Parks East on the other side of town, and has a long and storied career in history, and we'll hear more about that in just a few moments. And as I said, our third panelist is Mrs. Georgia Ellard, who was the first Black woman superintendent of Rock Creek Park and took the park through the early 80s and had some wonderful additions to the park's repertoire, if you will. I regret that we're not able to have Adrienne Coleman, who served between Mrs. Ellard and Tara. There were some men in there too. She was not able to make it this evening, but we send her our appreciation for her leadership of the park in the meantime. So I'd like to open the conversation this evening by asking each of you, and maybe I'll invite you, Mrs. Ellard, to go first, by just sharing a tiny bit about your career that got you to Rock Creek. Mrs. Ellard, I'll invite you to unmute yourself.
I would like to thank the Rock Creek Park Conservatory and also Rock Creek Park Julia Superintendent for this opportunity to join with you on this occasion. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to reflect on some of the time that I spent in Rock Creek Park, which was one of the highlights of my career. I started in the National Park Service in 1958 as a clerk typist. I started at Fort DuPont Park, which is in Southeast Washington. And from there, I had at least 7 or 8 different assignments in the National Park Service, each one of them more responsible. I was happy to be able to work very closely with the Department of Recreation and also the A&C units throughout the city as I progressed through my career. I would like to also acknowledge the fact that I had a lot of people who were responsible for guiding me through my career and making it possible for me to advance to the position that I finally ended up with. I worked in the regional office as an administrative officer. I worked in the personnel office in the main Department of the Interior. I worked also at Harper's Ferry for a brief period of time. And I worked finally at Rock Creek Park, which was probably my famous and most popular and best assignment that I had in the National Park Service. All of my career was with the National Park Service. I never went to another agency. That's the only agency that I worked with. However, I had 8 different assignments in the National Park Service.
Well, we are delighted that one of those was Rock Creek. Tara, can you share a little bit about your path to Rock Creek?
Well, my path to Rock Creek was through, I guess, I'm trying to remember exactly how I arrived at Rock Creek Park, because I had so many interim assignments before that. But when Jim Redmond saw that I was going to be leaving the National Visitor Center, which was the first place that I received a management position, he invited me to join him as his assistant superintendent. The National Visitor Center, as most of you may know, was located in Union Station, and it was supposed to be the beginning point for people who came to the city of Washington. They were supposed to get information about the monuments and the memorials and the sites in Washington and board the tourmobile there for their beginning of their trip. However, the visitor center, the Union Station building, had a multitude of problems. And among the main problem was the leaking ceiling. And so when that happened, of course, we had to close down the facility. And when we closed it down, most of the people were assigned to other areas throughout the National Capital Region. However, they weren't exactly sure where they were going to assign Georgia Ellard, because she was a park manager and there were no vacancies at that time. So I was called to a meeting in the National Capital Region office to talk to the regional director, who was Jack Fish, and also his assistant, who was Bob Stanton, to determine exactly where I would be assigned. As I was running up the steps to that meeting, I met Jim Redmond, who I had worked with at Fort DuPont. He was a horticulturist there. And so Jim said, "Hi, Georgia, I understand that the ceiling is falling at Union Station. And what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, that's what I'm going to find out now." He said, "Well, I know just the place for you. It's Rock Creek Park. I don't have an assistant." So he went to the meeting with me and he proposed to the regional director and his assistant that I join him as the assistant superintendent. And that's how I landed at Rock Creek Park.
Thank you for sharing that. We are so happy for that kind of happy accident, if you will. And someone in the chat mentioned that you are a ceiling crasher. So I guess there were a lot of crashing ceilings involved in your path. Tara, can you share a little bit about your path to Rock Creek?
Sure. I also want to thank both Rock Creek Conservancy and Rock Creek Park for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm very excited to spend some time with Mrs. Ellard. So my path to Rock Creek Park, I came to the park in 2011 from New York City, where I was the superintendent of the African Burial Ground. And that was my first superintendent position. And I was the first superintendent of that national monument. And, so jumping back to the beginning, I actually came to the Park Service in 1996 as an intern. I had to do an internship for graduate school, and it was here in Washington with the Washington Office Archaeology Program. And from there, I was introduced to, it was just when the Park Service was launching the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program. And it was not my desire to stay with the National Park Service. I thought it was just going to be a, couple of months internship and go on to whatever the next thing was. But I never left the Park Service. So I've been affiliated with the Park Service since May of 1996. After my internship, I was hired as a contractor and did that for 2 years with the same program. And my first permanent Park Service position was as a park ranger at Boston African American National Historic Site. And several positions after that got me back to the African burial ground. And then, I opened the site. I was there for a few years, and Rock Creek Park Superintendency was advertised. And it was advertised and I didn't apply. I was encouraged to apply, didn't apply. And then it was advertised again. And it was really a stretch for me because my background was really history and museum management, but I knew I wanted to advance in my career and I knew I would only live in urban areas. And so I was intrigued by being able to be in a city that had a park, that had a forest. At the time, the National Park Service was launching Healthy Parks, Healthy People. And so on a personal note, it was also a time where I had to make an investment in my personal health and well-being. And so both professionally and personally, it felt like a great fit. And fortunately, I was selected for the position and was there from 2011 to 2016.
That is incredible. And I think we all can appreciate the health benefits of Rock Creek even more over this last year and a half. So glad to see that you had the foresight there. And Julia, can you tell us about your route to Rock Creek? Please. Unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Absolutely. Sure, I can tell you about that. But first, I want to just tell Superintendent Ellard what an honor it is to be on this panel with you and to really follow in your footsteps. And also Superintendent Morrison and I have become close working buddies as she is now the superintendent of all the parks east on the southeast side of Washington, D.C. and into Maryland, Southern Maryland. And so we are constantly working together, and it's just a pleasure and an honor to be working with you, Tara. So thanks for the friendship. So I really grew up in Rock Creek Park and I lived in the Forest Hills area of Washington, D.C. But I did not necessarily grow up thinking I'm going to join the National Park Service. When I completed my college degree, I thought I wanted to be a science teacher. And I went off to Africa, to Sierra Leone, West Africa, with the US Peace Corps and taught science in a middle school, high school, they called it a secondary school there for 2 years. And that sealed the deal. When I came back, I definitely wanted to be a science teacher. And I was applying to graduate school and doing some volunteer work at Fort DuPont Park, which is part of Superintendent Morrison's park. And the volunteer work was working with DC public school kids doing environmental education. And I just fell in love with environmental education, and I fell in love with the Park Service there at Fort DuPont. Everyone was so welcoming, and it was such a great experience. And so a permanent position became available. And because I had been in the United States Peace Corps, I had the privilege of being able to apply for a permanent government job with the Park Service. And I applied for it and got it. And so I started there as a GS5 interpretive park ranger in Fort DuPont. And I've been with the Park Service ever since. And it's been with a short hiatus to work with the National Park Foundation. And it's been a pleasure and a journey. And I am so happy to have landed in Rock Creek Park.
Well, we are so very happy to have you here in Rock Creek Park, or in the metaphorical Rock Creek Park space, since we're all virtual. We're incredibly lucky to have your leadership and so many others. As you were all speaking, and I encourage you, Mrs. Ellard and Julia and Tara, when we had the conversation last week, it's clear you all really enjoy each other's company. Please feel free to jump in and ask each other questions as we're talking. If you're not one of the superintendents, please put your questions in the chat box. But I'm really curious. One of the themes of these programs has been the intersection of race and history and Rock Creek. And in addition to race, as we're thinking about diversity and inclusiveness in Rock Creek, gender is certainly a component of that. And you all, it looks from having the three of you as if there's always been women in leadership, whether at Rock Creek or in the National Park Service. And I would just appreciate if you could each say a few words about what it's been like in your career for you individually or your observations of others. Feel free to jump in.
Well, I think that in Rock Creek Park and in the National Park Service, the opportunity for women was very limited. Women served, excuse me, women served as clerk typists and also as administrative assistants, but they were not necessarily promoted to be superintendents or assistant superintendents, not only in the National Capital Region, but throughout. The number of women in the National Park Service was served as auxiliaries to the park superintendents. They had ideas about how to promote the activities in the park, but they weren't given much of an opportunity to be employed by the Park Service until the 1940s. Then a few women were given the opportunity to be rangers, but they still were not promoted to the management assignments. So I think that if anybody that looks at the Park Service, even today, it's still an old boys organization. And I probably will get in trouble for saying that, but that's exactly how I see the National Park Service.
Julia, Tara, recognizing you don't have the freedom of retirement.
Well, I think it has, oh, sorry, you go ahead, Tara.
Okay, so, you know, I get this question a lot, and from just thinking about my personal experience first, you know, the encounters I've had, I will say I always question when people say things to me, are they saying it, you know, generally surprised at my position or where I am or what I've done? Is it based on my race, age, or gender? And sometimes I don't know which it is, but it's something other than what I am. And one clear example that I'll never forget is when I became the superintendent of the African Burial Ground, and a man said to me, you know, how did you get your job? I applied just like everyone else does. I was interviewed and I was selected. And so while you know, during my time with the Park Service, there are definitely more women, and I don't know the, you know, actual percentages, there are more women, there are certainly fewer Black women. And it is still, I still find that people are surprised of the positions that I've held, of the experiences that I've held. And I really always question, are they basing it on certainly gender or race? And most people think I'm younger than I am. So age falls in there as well, although not so much anymore.
So I'll just add to that, when I was, you know, a GS5 park ranger, I was always very aware of my age and always very aware of the fact that I was a woman. And as I got older and as I moved up in my positions in the Park Service, I still continually found myself often walking into a room that was all men. And that is not the case anymore. Women have made quite a big impact into the Park Service, but we're still in the 40% range. And as you go higher up into management ranks, that number goes lower. Although I think white women in particular are almost neck and neck now with the men. But if you look at the numbers in the Park Service regarding people of color and women of color, you will find that the percentage is very small of the number of people in the Park Service. And as you go up in the ranks of the Park Service, it gets small. That percentage gets smaller and smaller. In fact, most of the diversity in the Park Service today is from the GS9 level and below. So I do think that that's changing slowly in fits and starts, but I think that the Park Service, like Superintendent Ellard observed, is still male dominated and still white dominated. And I think we have to make some profound changes in things like hiring practices and HR practices, and look at some of our traditions in the way that we hire and dismantle some of those systems to really make the difference that we need to make and inroads into dismantling that old boys network. I do think it's gotten better over the years, but I think we still have a fair ways to go.
Is there something for all three of you that you've done or continue to do in your work as a leader of your own park that is chipping away at those systems or is helping or leveraging some of the opportunities that are baked into the system?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. And, Julia mentioned our friendship, and I will say it's definitely grown significantly over the last year. And that is because of the challenges that we faced in the National Park Service over the last year, both with the pandemic and all of the, what I call an awakening to injustice. And so we together have worked not only within our parks, but within our region to create space to have those conversations. And, it's something that we both personally and professionally believe in. And as superintendents, I feel it's part of our responsibility as leaders in the organization to create those spaces, to have those conversations. And for a long time, I've been with the Park Service as a federal employee for 23 years. It's been optional, it's those who want to have the conversation, and it really is time for it to be a conversation to be had by all. And if you look at the mission of the National Park Service, there's really no reason why we shouldn't be at the forefront of having those conversations. So before we can even talk about recruitment and hiring practices, I think about something my mother used to say to me is, you can't have company until you clean your room. So until we look inward internally and do the hard work to have those conversations within our own organizations and create an environment where people are going to want to come and work, to me, that needs to come before we talk about recruiting, because we're not going to retain people if we don't do that hard work. So I'm thankful to have a partner in that work in Julia, and also with our other colleagues in the National Capital area. We're fortunate, we're so geographically close, and what we all experienced together provided an opportunity for us to have conversations that I don't know that we would have had otherwise.
Julia, if you'd be willing to answer that, I might ask you to expand your answer a little bit to mention if there are things where your partner organizations can be helpful or bring resources to the table to help with some of those challenges as your philanthropic partner.
Yeah, absolutely. As Tara mentioned, creating a space for these important conversations to happen and creating a space where we can look at things like workplace culture and try to do better and dismantle some of the biases that are baked into the culture. So being able to have those conversations openly has been a real gift the past year, and it's been a real honor to work with Tara on that. So what do I do personally? Well, I mentor people all the time, as many people as I can, to the point where sometimes it takes up too much time in my schedule. But I especially love to find, eager young people who want to have a National Park Service career, but feel like there's blocks or blockades to them in certain ways, and spending time talking with them about the Park Service and the culture of the Park Service in general and ways to navigate that, but also about the hiring practices and tips on how to write your federal resume and what to do on those big, long questionnaires that it's really crazy to get a federal job. I mean, the application process is much different than in the private sector. So people need someone to hold their hands through that. But people need people, once they're in, people also need people to hold their hands or listen to them. And I think that's the main thing that I do with my mentoring is I mostly listen to people, listen to their stories, affirm them, and make sure that they know that they're not alone. So that's a big part of it. But we also do a lot of things within the Park Service to try to recruit and retain young people in particular to come into the ranks, and especially young people of color. And part of the way that we've done that for many years is through youth conservation corps. And we've worked with many of the youth organizations to do that. And right now, Rock Creek Conservancy is currently operating the RC3 program, which is what does RC3 stand for?
Rock Creek Conservation Corps, and we have at least one of our RC3 members with us this evening. I know they're excited about this.
Yeah, we have one of them with us today. That's terrific. And so those young people spend the summer in Rock Creek Park, and they do service projects, and they learn about the park, and they get some environmental education, and they get to leave their own mark on the park. And so we're grateful to the Rock Creek Conservancy for that, and our other partners who also help to encourage young people to learn about the park and become good stewards of the park and fall in love with the park, whether or not they go on to a National Park Service career. The idea is we want everyone to feel welcome in Rock Creek Park, and we want everyone to feel like it's their space. It's not somebody else's space. They're not visitors. It's they are the owners, they're the participants, and they belong in this space. And we work on that in other ways too, through community engagement. We have a long way to go on that, but it's a huge goal. One of my 4 priorities is access, and that's both physical access through ways into the park, especially from the east side of the park, to make it more accessible. Access for people with all kinds of disabilities or needs, and that means it could be for wheelchairs, it could also be for strollers. So there's basically universal access is the goal. We have a long way to go on that, but we're working on it. And right now I can give you an example. At Meridian Hill Park, we're restoring the lower plaza of the park, and it will be, for the first time in its history, 100-year history, it will be mobility accessible to the lower part of Meridian Hill. So we're really excited about making a National Historic Landmark accessible to people. And then finally, making the park accessible to them from the point of view of feeling safe, psychological safety as well as physical safety. So that's those are some of the things that we're doing.
Thank you. Mrs. Ellard, do you want to speak to anything that you obviously, just by your very presence in the park, broke through ceilings and opened doors for those who followed you, but was there anything else that you did in your
Well, during the mayor's Mayor Barry's summer in the parks program, we invited him to that program to have children come to the park to work. And so every year we entertained probably between 20 and 25 youngsters on our staff. They worked in interpretation, resource management, as well as maintenance. It was difficult for them to get to the park because there's no bus access, and many of them didn't have transportation. But we tried our best to ensure that they would be there for a period of time so that they would get to understand and know the park. Some of the children had never been to Rock Creek Park, even though they lived in the city all of their lives. And so it was an introduction for them to know the park and to actually get acquainted with the park personnel. I'm wanting to congratulate the conservatory on their program that they have with youth, because it is an avenue for people to join the Park Service and to get a better understanding of what the Park Service is all about. A lot of times, Black children only go to entertainment facilities. They don't go to areas where you have resources that are available to them that are not necessarily dancing and playing ball. So I think the conservatory is doing a good thing by having their programs where they're introducing children from the city to the park areas and giving them the opportunity at a young age to know what it's all about to work in a park service.
Well, I will say a special shout out to Alexandra, who's with us from RC3 this evening. And it is incredible, the summer youth employment program that you mentioned, Mrs. Ellard, that Marion Barry started when he was mayor, that continues to be the way that we fundraise for many of the costs, but then are able to use that as a way to pay a lot of the students that work in Rock Creek through the summer. So it's a real legacy. It feels a little frivolous to turn to this question next, but the picture behind you is inspiring me, Mrs. Ellard, and I love that fierce look of determination in your eyes in that particular picture. We spoke a little last week when we were getting ready for this about the uniforms in the park, and I think that the relative comfort of those perhaps speaks to some of the other ways that you are describing feeling as a woman in the service. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your uniform when you were superintendent, Mrs. Ellard, and any commentary you'd like to share.
The uniform was a very unforgiving uniform for women. The pants did not feel very comfortable. However, there was great pride when you put on that uniform, and people respected you when they saw you in the uniform and expected you to be able to give them information about all activities that occurred in the city of Washington, D.C., whether it was a park question or whether it was some other question. But they thought because you were uniformed that you had the answers to all of the questions. When I went to some areas in the city in uniform, people identified me as being law enforcement. That wasn't always comfortable, but once you made known that you were a Park Service employee and that you were there to provide information and assistance in understanding the mission and the programs of the Park Service, then there was a greater understanding between the resident that you were talking to and the park employee.
Julia or Tara, want to weigh in on the uniform?
Sure. My thoughts go from one spectrum to the other. So I have to say, I wore a uniform 1st through 12th grade. So it was, I went to college, I had no clothes. So to come back to a uniform in some ways I was grateful for that. And as Ms. Ellard said, I have had experiences where it's perceived as a law enforcement uniform, and maybe that's not welcomed or can be off-putting, but I've also had, conversely, particularly with older Black people, to have a sense of pride when they see me in uniform. And I come to a community meeting and express that they're proud of me and my accomplishments and having the position that I have. So just as all human beings have different experiences and different opinions, I've received the range of those opinions related to the uniform. But I will say, wearing it today and managing a park staff who wears the uniform, there is a sense of pride, and that we are fortunate enough to have this opportunity to steward these lands for the American public. So when I wear the uniform, that's one of the first thoughts I think of. But I will agree, it's not necessarily forgiving. So there is that.
And I must say, I've seen some pictures of the uniforms over the years, and it does seem like they are becoming more suited to different body types and maybe a little bit more forgiving than they have been in the past. Julia, you want to say something on the
Well,
uniform?
I would just say that they have a long way to go.
If anyone out there has a fashion design sense, perhaps there's an opportunity there.
Yeah. But no, the uniform is tricky because as my colleagues have said, that it can represent law enforcement, and we have a great deal of Latinx visitors to Rock Creek Park, and whether or not they're there on a visa or a green card or not, there can be some concern of somebody in a law enforcement type of uniform walking up to a picnic area, for example, or coming to one of the events that they are sponsoring. And so, we don't want to have the uniform be off-putting to people. We want it to be welcoming to all, like it is sort of in the traditional romantic view of sort of the white nuclear family going on their trip in their station wagon out west and seeing the park rangers, and they always loving the park rangers. Well, not everybody in urban areas and not everybody in some of the rural areas like the federal government or the park rangers. So it's tricky. At the same time, it does represent the mission and the history of the National Park Service, and we do wear it with pride. And I think one thing that Tara says a lot is she's a stickler for the uniform. If we're going to wear it, right? If we're going to wear it, we should wear it correctly and with pride. And then maybe there are times when it's not appropriate to wear it, and we have plenty of logoed polo shirts and khaki pants that we can put on and to wear at certain situations where a uniform may not be the most welcome.
Is there anything, Julia, I mean, you grew up right near Rock Creek Park, so are a Washington native, but certainly Mrs. Ellard and Tara, you both have lived in the DC area for a while and, have become members of the communities that you're serving. And I'm just curious if there's anything about the putting on of that uniform, if there's a little bit of code switching, or if the way that you find, whether it's community members interacting with you or the way you feel as a member of that community switches with the uniform.
Well, it depends on the situation. I really want Rock Creek Park to be part of the greater community and part of the many communities that are adjacent to the park. And there are times when the uniform is quite appropriate in those interactions. And people love to see that park rangers are part of their community and doing things in their community. And again, there's times when it represents authority and federal government, and it makes some of the interactions that we have sometimes a little more difficult. So it just depends. But I don't think that I necessarily code switch in the traditional sense of that word. But when you are wearing the uniform, you are representing the federal government, whether you like it or not.
Yes, having walked in the park with you in your uniform, I know that it also comes with demands on your time. So
it does.
It can be hard to be at rest, if you will, in this wonderful respite.
So Jeannie, I
Yeah.
just would want to add to that is, I do think, Julia talked about wanting the park and the staff to be a part of the community and the park team. And I feel the same way. And it helps to build those relationships and help people to understand what the National Park Service is and who we are and what we do in uniform. And at the end of the day, it's the person in the uniform. So whether we're in uniform or not, I try to focus on establishing those relationships and connections with the communities that are around the parks and who are users or frequent visitors to the parks. So uniform or not, at the end of the day, for me, it comes down to us taking the time and focused attention to establish those relationships.
Yeah. For sure. And we're lucky to have leaders of Rock Creek Park and the other parks in DC who really think and feel that way, because there are really, I think, wonderful opportunities. One of the things that I've been struck by in the couple of years that I've been with the Conservancy is the challenge, part of being part of a community is getting to live there. And particularly hearing you speak earlier this evening about some of these wonderful programs that exist to help bring new, fresh faces into the Park Service as staff. Julia, you mentioned the Peace Corps on-ramp, but there were some of the internship programs that were mentioned. Speaking just for the Conservancy, as we've brought on AmeriCorps members and other, some of these programs that offer the federal hiring program. And I think, Julia, your park has experienced this as well. It's really challenging to live as an AmeriCorps member, to afford to live close enough to the park to really be a member of that community. So, that certainly seems like one thing that we as partners can help, potentially identify cost-effective ways to bring people or changes to those programs at a structural level.
Yeah, it certainly is economically difficult for young people just starting their careers to live in the DC area because of the cost of living. And unfortunately, we had, and I'll use past tense, and a dorm that was very affordable and many young people used over the years as a great place to live while they're working in the park or the parks, other parks in the region. Unfortunately, that has become, let me say this, it requires a very expensive amount of overhaul to get it up to code for current conditions. And so that's off the table for now. We are lucky because we have had partners, and I think maybe one of your board members, even Jeannie, who opened their doors to an intern last summer or summer before, and gave them a spare room in their home. So, everybody can't get that. I mean, if we could figure out a way to house these young people more effectively, that would be great. We'd love to figure out a way to partner with local universities to see if summer dorm space is available, or to find a solution, because that is a barrier to young people coming and doing their internships here. And even if they're paid, which we absolutely want to pay all of our interns, even if they're paid, they don't make enough to be able to pay rent around here. So it's an equity issue. It really is.
When we had students from Southern University to partner with the park, they stayed at Howard University. Now, I'm not sure how that was made possible, but those students did not have to pay to stay at the university, and they interned with Rock Creek Park during the period that I was there.
Well, maybe we need to return to Howard and some of the other universities and see if a partnership can be created there.
And I'd like to see a balance, and I will start with the out-of-state interns, because that was me. And as I mentioned, I did have to find an internship that paid. And I think, even as Julia said, with that stipend, I still wouldn't have been able to afford to live here had I not had a friend who already lived here, and I was able to room with her while I was here for the summer. But on the other side, into how partners can help, I would like to see a balance with, bringing in interns and students from schools out of state, with providing opportunities for students who are, local residents and who have a connection with the parks in this area. And how can we help to expose them beyond the high school programs, which are great, but as college students, expose them to job opportunities in the National Park Service. And some percentage may choose to stay with us, but really that also helps to build the relationships that I was talking about with our local community. So one of the things I'm often asked is, where are the jobs? Do you have jobs? And so for the federal jobs, we have to go through the federal process. But in working with partners, there are also opportunities that we can create for local students to get them into the system as well.
Absolutely.
And I would mention that the fabulous Lindstrom Terry, who is with us this evening and helped put this and the rest of our series of programs together, who's with us this year on an AmeriCorps Vista program, is a DC native and a veteran of maybe like 12 years of National Park Service youth and community programming. So we're incredibly grateful to all of the other parks in the region that have helped him get to where he is today. While we're talking about programs and mentoring and ways to advance individuals, the really wonderful Nikki Fern, who is also a leader in this, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion in the national parks domain, asked if any of you are familiar with any programs where women mentor men, possibly senior men, to work more effectively with women.
Love Mickey Fern. He's the former deputy director of the National Park Service and an absolute guru on inclusion regarding parks and recreation, and creating more just green space for all. I don't know of any mentoring programs where women are mentoring men. I have heard of a few situations where young people are mentoring older people in how to work with them. But very few, like there's like 2 or 3 that I've heard of. But it's a great idea, right? To have young people be helping older people understand about how their experience in the service is, and what resonates for them, and what is the best way for us to work with them.
Excellent. Tara or Mrs. Ellard, do either of you want to chime in, or any of the ways that you helped all of the members of your teams?
Well, my team was well in place when I became the superintendent, and we worked as a cohesive group. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. They took pride in doing their job. We had different sections. We had the maintenance people, the resource management people, and the interpretive people, and they cooperated. There wasn't a division between those units. And so if one needed help, the other one was available to do that. We didn't just have Rock Creek Park, of course. We had Montrose Park, Meridian Hill Park, the old stone house. We also had a portion of Dumbarton Oaks. And so there were very types of jobs that needed to be done that required specialized skills. But each unit, if they had those people available to perform those duties, they would certainly make them available, and everything worked together so that we had a unified situation.
That's great to hear. I feel like I know Rock Creek Park pretty well, and it's 3,000 acres and all those different bits and pieces, but I'm always astounded by the diversity of landscapes and lands that you all have to manage as part of Rock Creek Park. It seems so small and manageable, but it is such a complex unit. So maybe that's a good transition to asking each of you could mention one real highlight of your tenure in Rock Creek Park, and one big either challenge or thing you wish you could do over.
Well, one of the highlights of my tenure at Rock Creek Park was to reopen Pierce Mill. It had been closed for a long period of time, and the children of the city were accustomed to going there for interpretive programs. And that was an opportunity for the other park superintendents to work together with me to open that facility. We had the superintendent of the C&O Canal, who had people who specialized in repairing sluiceways. We had people from East who knew about doing brickwork. And so we were able to launch a program that allowed us to go ahead and open up Pierce Mill. And that was one of the main things that I was pleased with, because our interpretive people worked with the schools to get them oriented to what Pierce Mill was all about. And so when we finally were able to open up the facility, we were able to then encourage the school system to bring their children to Pierce Mill so that they could see an operating mill. And that was one of the highlights of my career, was to open up Pierce Mill so that it could be an asset to the city and to the school system. If I would talk about an issue that I had that was probably negative, it was the fact that I didn't have enough personnel. I didn't have enough money to maintain the facility the way that I would like to. We had a lot of exotic plants. We had a lot of intrusion by neighbors who would dump their literature and all of their stuff in the park. We had many issues that we could have resolved if we had more personnel and a better budget. But those things we didn't have any control over. We continued to beg and beg and beg for a bigger budget and more personnel. However, also during the period of time that I was there, the construction of the tennis court was a major operation that took place. the 16th and Kennedy Street area was primarily used for picnicking. And so the neighbors were very, very concerned when we decided that we were going to construct a tennis court on the area where they were accustomed to having jogging paths and also picnic areas. And so with the Washington Area Tennis Association and the National Park Service and the DC Department of Recreation, all of us had to work together to ensure that there was a good understanding of the benefits that would be received by the neighborhood. Promises were made to give the children opportunities to have tennis lessons and other programs would be conducted at the tennis courts for the people of the city of Washington, DC. And so it did turn out to be a very successful venture. So that was a highlight of my career also, was the construction of the tennis court.
That's great. Tara or Julia?
I'll go next, we'll go in order.
All right.
So both my highlight and challenge stem from the complexity of the portfolio. And like in National Capital Parks East, Rock Creek Park portfolio is a multi-park portfolio. So I would say the highlight for me was creating the partnership coordinator position. And so for the many park units within the Rock Creek Park portfolio, there are several partners, and the park wasn't structured in a way to work most effectively with all of those partners. So in creating the partnership coordinator, that provided us on the park staff side with a liaison and someone to help us work better with all of our partners and bringing all of the partners together to establish relationships, I would say is the highlight, as well as celebrating the 125th anniversary of Rock Creek Park. So those two were my highlights. And then the challenge is similar or exactly as what Ms. Ellard said. So where I had a highlight and a success in creating the partnership coordinator position and structuring us in a way to receive additional support and leverage resources between partners and park, we weren't able to grow the park staff to reflect the complexity of the portfolio. But the positive back to that is strengthening those relationships with the partners so that ultimately we had more resources to benefit the park.
And I will say on behalf of the Conservancy and all the other park partners, we are so grateful for the position of partnership coordinator in its sort of isolated sense, but also the individual human that you hired into that role, the fabulous Rita Gunther, who makes our jobs manageable. Well done.
So I've given this a little bit of thought. Tara laid the groundwork for it, but I did have the honor early on in my tenure at Rock Creek Park to sign the philanthropic partnership agreement with the Rock Creek Conservancy. And it was, I'm so glad that we were able to do that, get that over the finish line, and grow and develop the partnership that we have today, which is always, it's always improving. But just having the opportunity through Rita and having the mindset, I think that we are a partnership park, and we have some tremendous partners, and cultivating those relationships and nurturing those relationships and maintaining those relationships is a good deal of what Rita and I do on a regular basis. So the partnerships, I think, are something that I feel good about. I keep coming back to COVID. COVID was a challenge. It still is a challenge. But, you know, we lost about 50% of our maintenance crew to what we call weather and safety leave, because they self-identified in a category, a risk category, or they lived with a loved one who was in a risk category and they could not come to work. They did continue to get paid, which was good, which was great, but they could not come to work, which left us with basically 50% capacity in the field. And some of our interpreters also were out on weather and safety leave as well. So finding a way to keep morale up as best as possible, continue to build teamwork, continue to have the empathy and the listening ears on. I mean, I think listening is one of the things that I do most with my day every day, and being able to just nurture our staff through that very difficult period is something that was a great challenge, but also something that I'm proud of and is kind of most front of mind for me right now. I haven't really been here long enough to have the big kinds of accomplishments that Superintendent Ellard and Superintendent Morrison have, but certainly some are coming down the line, and I'm anticipating in particular the complete renovation of the Carter Barron Amphitheater and getting that back to its former glory. That is one of my high priorities.
We are very excited for that. And we are also grateful for the partnership. So thank you for signing that agreement. I want to remind all of our participants that we would love to see some questions from you all in the chat. Please feel free to start entering those in. Mrs. Ellard, this isn't a question so much as a comment, but somebody mentioned a conference for women in the National Park Service that was held, I think, in 1979. And she said it was a wonderful way for the women in the National Park Service to find each other. And I'm curious if you attended that conference, and if so, no, sounds like not.
No, I don't know anything about that conference.
Yeah, well, sounds like it would have been a good one. A blast. Were there other ways that you connected with other women in the National Park Service? It's clear that Julia and Tara both get a lot from the relationship they have with each other.
There weren't that many women in management positions when I was in the Park Service, so that my associations were primarily with superintendents who were male. In fact, there was no other female superintendent in the National Capital Region when I was the superintendent there. Shortly thereafter, however, Vicki McGraw became the superintendent of National Capital Park Central, and Audrey Calhoun became the superintendent of George Washington Memorial Parkway. But they were not, I was on my way out when they were on their way in. So that all of my mentorship was with male superintendents, not with female.
And maybe this is a chance, Mrs. Ellard, you have had a amazing career since your time in the National Park Service. Would you like to share just a little bit about what you've been doing and how your work with the National Park Service helped with that? Well,
when I was with the Park Service, I was hugging trees, but now I hug people. I work for an independent apartment building that is geared to seniors. And many of them do not know how to fill out the applications that are required to receive social services such as Medicaid, food stamps, and other programs as they would need. So that my job was to assist them in making sure that they met the certification period. Each year they had to recertify, even though their only income was Social Security in most instances, but the government required that they fill out the same applications annually. And if you are familiar with government forms, you know that there are 10 and 12 pages. Some of the information is relevant and some is not. You have to fill out everything and make sure you accompany it with the proper documentation that shows that you are eligible for those services. So for the last 27 years, I have worked at Franklin Apartments as a tenant liaison, providing support to the people who need to have those social services provided to them. In addition, the owner of the facility made available recreational opportunities so that, I guess about 3 times out of the year, we would take people on special trips. So we would go on the Spirit of Washington. We went to Toby's Dinner Theater. We went to the fair, and we just made it very pleasant for those seniors to have an opportunity to live in a building that was dedicated to their needs and to their desires.
Hugging is a theme, at least that I can identify amongst the superintendents of Rock Creek Park, whether trees or people. We had a question. It's kind of a question, it's kind of a statement. In the past, there were wildlife activities for kids and communities. Moving forward, it would be nice to see a return to those in a large way for the many community city kids to see wildlife brought into their communities. I don't know if Tara or Julia would like to respond.
Yeah, I mean, we've unfortunately, our nature center has been closed for the past year and a half due to the COVID pandemic. Prior to that, though, we were offering quite a few programs at the nature center itself, and park rangers would also do curriculum-based programming with school groups and go into the schools quite a lot. And we certainly want to pick up on those programs again now that things are beginning to lift, although we're cautiously optimistic with the lifting of the pandemic, and reopening the nature center, we hope this fall. So I believe in the month of August, the nature center will be open on Saturdays and Sundays. And then we hope to get it completely opened in September, barring any changes in the pandemic for the worse. Hopefully we won't be going there. So we agree with you. We think the programs for children, both in the communities and in the parks, are very important, and we're going to support them as much as we can.
And I would say the same thing for National Capital Parks East, and just a couple come to mind, both in what we call Anacostia Park broadly and locally, and Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens with our park ranger team, as well as our partners in Friends of Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens and Friends of Anacostia Park, and with Akima Price, who has served as our Anacostia Park liaison for the last 3 years. So the complement of partners and our park rangers, we do offer programs that introduce young people in particular to wildlife in the park areas.
And Tara, you make me remember that our partners do also provide programming. And Friends of Pierce Mill, for example, have been working really hard on distance learning activities during COVID. And many of our programs have converted over fairly well to a distance learning platform, but we wouldn't be able to do that again without partners. And quite a few of our partners do offer educational programming, which is really important and helpful to us.
And we had a comment from Angela at Friends of Pierce Mill, who appreciates Mrs. Ellard. You are getting that mill back up and running, and notes that work is still coming today. And I think we have Akima here with us today too. So it's keeping it all in the family. And Mrs. Ellard, we have a couple of your children joining us today too. And much as you wouldn't choose a favorite child, I'm not going to ask you to pick a favorite part of the park, but maybe is there a part of the park that was particularly memorable for each of you?
Well, I don't know that we had any particular part that was memorable, because we visited most of the areas that were under the jurisdiction of Rock Creek Park, so that they accompanied me on those occasions. But also we attended activities that were geared to remember the anniversary of the Park Service. So we went to programs that were held at Fort Hunt and Bellevue. I think it's Bellevue Park. But we attended many of those activities. And then my children were also in the program that was conducted by the District of Columbia Recreation Department at Fort Totten. They had, I guess it was day camps, but one night out of the period, they would stay overnight. So it was very excellent. And then we also attended concerts at the Carter Barron Amphitheater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Ellard, one of your daughters says that she remembers the Carter Barron summer concert, so she's answering for you. Julia or Tara, any favorite and/or memorable spots in the park, either solo or with your kids or family?
So for me, it's Carter Barron concerts. It was great to be able to do that for a few years. And also just being deep in the park, in the forest, and being able to be in Washington, D.C. and yet feel like you were not in Washington, D.C. So just for peace of mind, those are moments that when I worked at Rock Creek Park, I lived in Silver Spring. And so it was, easy on the weekends to just come down and have a little quiet time in the park.
I think the part of the park that I feel like is sort of I feel like the park is my spiritual home. But I feel like the part of the park that is in particular close for me is up on the ridge near the nature center and the horse stables. At that high point. In fact, my father had names for all of the places in the park. He had his own set of nomenclature for the park. And so that area up there at the ridge was called High Point. And we would go up there and have picnics all the time. I remember many happy days, especially with my father. My mother was there often as well, but it was really our thing, my dad and me, to go have a picnic in the park up at High Point. So that's sort of the area that I identify with most.
Oh, that's lovely. Mrs. Ellard, this question is for you. What advice would you give to the working women that find themselves in leadership positions and having to balance family and work life?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer. You have to have a cooperating family, and you have to include them in all aspects of your job so that they feel that they're a part of it. Even it doesn't mean that they're going to be actually performing any of the duties, but if they're aware of what your responsibilities are, then I think there's much more cooperation when you have to be away at conferences or late meetings. So I think that it's easy to incorporate your family into your assignment if you keep them advised of exactly what's going on with you and your job.
Anyone else want to take that one? And whether it's children or parents, other loved ones that you're caring for?
Well, I'll just say I've raised 2 children during my tenure in the Park Service, and also cared for both of my parents through their illnesses. And I think the most important thing for me was really maintaining time for myself and having work-life balance. And even today, now that those responsibilities are over, my children are grown, my parents have passed on, I still feel that having good work-life balance is incredibly important to me, to my mental health and my physical health. And it's something that I try to model for my staff as well. I think if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't do a good job at our jobs. So.
I'm pleased to report that your daughter Linda says that you balance that work-life balance quite well, Mrs. Ellard. So success. Hopefully my son will mention that someday. We had another question from one of our RC3 members who asked about opportunities for high school students during the school year. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that there will be some opportunities through the Conservancy to extend RC3 into the school year. But if there are other opportunities that you all would like to share.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we do a number of curriculum-based programs with schools. And so we continue to try to expand those as much as possible, especially with our partners. But, you know, there are opportunities there. And also, if you wanted to volunteer, we have a new volunteer program coordinator coming on board, actually next Monday. And he works with Rita Gunther, who we mentioned is the partnerships program coordinator. She's also our youth program coordinator and volunteer coordinator. And I'm sure that Kyle could come up with good volunteer opportunities for folks as well.
So I think I figured out the question by Julia's answer, but Jeannie, could you repeat it?
Are there opportunities at your park for high school students during the school year for internships or other work opportunities?
Oh, so yes, so similar to what I did at Rock Creek at National Capital Parks East, we created a partnerships, volunteer and youth program, and to have a program manager And we too will soon be hiring a volunteer coordinator. So we're building or rebuilding our program now. And I would say anyone who's interested can contact the park and speak directly with the partnerships, the Chief of Partnerships program, Partnerships Volunteer and Youth. But while I have the mic, I did also want to speak to the earlier question about balance, because, and this is particular, when I talk to young women particularly, I tell them to not do what I did, which is not balance well early in my career. And so, you know, when people say, do you have a family? Yes, I have a family. I have a mother, a father, a sister, and all that jazz, but I do not have children or a spouse. And that's because I didn't prioritize that early in my life. And so what I tell people is to really think about what it is you want out of your life and make time for that. I do have a very balanced life now. Some of my colleagues like Julia might challenge me on that, but I work hard and I play hard. So I find time for myself and my friends and family, and I give 100% at work and 100% in my personal time.
Some of that is still in Rock Creek Park. We had a question about what are up to 3 pieces of advice you would give to neighbors of the park to be good stewards of Rock Creek. Julia,
I don't know if my predecessors want to take a crack at that, or I could go.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, first of all, to be a great steward of the park, being careful about what you plant in your garden, and making sure that you're planting native plants as much as possible, and also that you are removing non-native and invasive plants from your garden area. A big one that you find in gardens adjacent to Rock Creek Park is English ivy. And you often find it climbing trees. So unchoke your trees, cut the English ivy so that it dies and doesn't continue to choke out your trees, and remove as much of your English ivy as possible. But there's a whole host of other invasive species that we try to manage, and to have your help in managing those is important. And if you want more information about that, you can go to the Nature Center. We have some brochures, and we have experts in the park who would be happy to talk to you about that. I think a second thing would be manage your stormwater. So the water that runs off of your roof and down into the soil and into the gutters on the impervious surfaces, when it's coming from all of the houses in the urban area, and it's coming from all the parking lots and all the streets and all the impervious surfaces, it coming together creates a torrent through Rock Creek. You've probably seen the creek when it's high after a storm or during a storm. It's really, it becomes like a raging river that you know, with whitewater rapids. And if everyone did their part to manage their stormwater better, it would make a big difference. And so putting in rain barrels is one way to do it. Putting in rain gardens is another way to do it. And the Rock Creek Conservancy has a whole program that they run that will help you figure out how to manage your stormwater, and will help you with rain barrels. So I'd highly recommend that you get in touch with them. And another great way to be a good steward of the park is to support one of our partner organizations. Any of them, we have a big supply of partner organizations, and it would be great if you could help support them either with volunteer work or in any other way that you see fit to support them, because they're doing important work for stewardship within the park. For example, the Friends of the Pierce Mill have done so much in helping to make sure the mill is operational, and have planted an orchard, for example. Another partner of ours, Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy, is working tirelessly to restore that landscape. Rock Creek Conservancy, as you know, does incredible things with young people and with invasive plants, and it's creating oases. And I'm going to stop now because there's a huge storm hitting right here and it's very loud.
Well, Julia, you're getting the storms that were here yesterday. Julia is exercising her work-life balance by working remotely for a little bit this week. So we're glad that she was able to join us. But yes, hopefully one of my colleagues will post in the link. If you are interested in learning more about invasive plants, almost every Saturday morning, Conservancy staff have managed volunteers removing invasive plants in the park. And it's a great way to learn how to identify them and remove them so you can then go home or back to your school or your office and do the same. And we're fortunate to have other great partners to the park that do the same and work on related issues. Let's see, we have someone reporting that as a Girl Scout, she received several badges in the park. We're delighted to hear about that. We also had someone who said that when she was a child, she attended summer day camp in Fort DuPont Park. But that part of the park is now part of the Fort Chaplain Apartments. Do you ever see the Park Service going back to summer day camps again? Maybe Tara, if you want to speak to Anacostia there. Or
I can't speak to that, but I do know that those day camps were not operated by the National Park Service. They were in fact operated by the DC Recreation Department in cooperation with the Park Service. And so that in order to maintain those facilities and to register for them, you had to become a part of the DC Recreation Department.
That's great. Julia, the question was whether the Park Service would ever return to offering summer day camps. And Mrs. Ellard clarified that those camps were in the national park, but operated by DC Parks and Rec. Oh, Julia, you are muted.
I apologize. I'm actually away in teleworking this week. And where I'm at right now, there's a giant storm and it's making it actually rather hard for me to hear you. I apologize for that. So I'm going to stay mute for a few minutes until it passes by.
Be safe. If you need to close windows or something, please do. And I just want to mention that the Friends of Chevy Chase Circle have also joined the room, and there are just so many wonderful partners to so many wonderful parts of Rock Creek Park. Tara, were you starting to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that over the years, there have been other day camp opportunities, some with our Friends of Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, and then actually some in Fort DuPont. Julia and I and our colleague at George Washington Memorial Parkway managed the Civil War Defenses of Washington program. And several years ago, that program hosted day camp opportunities. Now, will we ever go back to that? I don't know the answer to that, but in the recent past, there have been those opportunities.
Wonderful. And I see that the Friends of Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens have representation here today. And if I am correct, I think they operate some summer programs in the park too. So there's just no end to opportunities, and hopefully we can all make it easy for people to identify and find those opportunities. As we come, we're not quite done, but as we're coming to the close of our time together, I'm wondering, Kim mentioned the Military Road School Preservation Trust is here too. So there is no shortage of partners, and we are so lucky to have them all working together. I wonder if each of you would like to offer a final reflection or two, whether on your tenure specific at Rock Creek, or another kind of reflection on your career in life as a woman and a human in the National Park Service.
Well, I consider my tenure at Rock Creek Park to be one of the most exciting jobs that I ever had, even though I love the job that I have now. But the opportunity to meet with people that I probably would never have had the opportunity to meet with, some of the higher officials in the government, even having the opportunity to testify on Capitol Hill, having met the wife of Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan, having been in the company of Lyndon Johnson. These were excellent opportunities for me. And also being able to attend other park areas, Yellowstone and Grand Canyon and other parks. So it was just a marvelous experience for me to be a member of the National Park Service. And I will always cherish the opportunity that I had to work for the National Park Service. It's an important part of my life.
Tara?
Yeah, so I believe I said this at the beginning. It was never a goal of mine to work for the National Park Service, and I didn't aspire to be a superintendent. This is my third time, but I will say it's, such a rewarding experience personally and professionally. And I'm just honored to be able to serve. And I feel that it's a calling. It's not something I set out to do. I feel that this is my purpose. And particularly as a Black woman, to provide opportunities to help the nation through the National Park Service understand the contributions of all who have played a role in shaping the nation, and to provide opportunities for people to access our national parks, particularly in urban areas. So, many days I'm like, how did I get here? How did this happen? And I just stopped questioning it, because I do believe it's a calling. And so I'll continue to do my part to do the best job that I can.
Things have calmed down here a little bit, so I think I can add to the conversation. So, I like to say that I actually started my career at Rock Creek Park when I was 7 years old, and I was a junior ranger. And I was a junior ranger up at the Nature Center as part of the Summer in the Parks program that Mrs. Ellard referred to earlier. So I'm an outcome of that program, if you will. And then later in my career, I worked at Rock Creek Park for a stint of about 5 years. And my final position when I was working there that time in the 90s was the Chief of Resources Management and Interpretation. And I always thought that my dream job was to be superintendent of Rock Creek Park. And I went on and I had an interesting career, which led me to a partner organization and also to the Washington office level, policy level. But when I heard that Tara was leaving her position at Rock Creek Park, I called her up and I'm like, Tara, are you really leaving? she's like, yeah, I am going to East. And I said, well, what do you think? Do you think that I would be a contender for the job? And she said, well, yes. And so I applied for it, and here I am in my dream job. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. I barring any unforeseen circumstances, I plan to retire from this job. And I feel very dedicated to the park and the people within and around the park and the people of the District of Columbia and Greater DMV to make sure that everyone has access to this place, that we're, as Tara mentioned, that we're telling a more complete story of the history of the Civil War defenses of Washington, as well as all of the varied history that is part of Rock Creek Park. I am honored to be part of managing and stewarding the natural resources of this place, and just feel so honored to be in this role. So it's just a pleasure every day to work with Rock Creek Park.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for your service to Rock Creek, to the National Park Service, and to the planet. The gift that is Rock Creek just keeps on giving, and we are so incredibly fortunate to have it. I wish that I could read you all of the really wonderful messages that are in the chat. I will email them to you later, because there are some, you all brought your own fan clubs to this particular event. There's a lot of appreciation for your individual and collective leadership and imprint that you've left on so many people, and the place that we all love and consider our wild home, Rock Creek Park. I must say that I would not have the patience for all of those forms, Mrs. Ellard. So working in partnership with you, Julia, is truly the highlight of my career. And I am so proud to manage the team that is lucky enough to partner with you and your staff. and with all of you who are participating in this program this evening. We certainly could not do this work without your support, your stewardship, and your enthusiasm and passion for Rock Creek Park. We are taking a break from this program in August so everybody can balance a little bit of work-life balance, and then my team can go on vacations, and all of you can do the same. But we will be back with another episode of Race History and Rock Creek in September with an in real life program. The Friends of Pierce Mill will be showing their film about Hattie Sewell at the mill, I believe on September 10th. We'll be sure to include that information as well as the link to the recording of this event in a follow-up email to everybody who is registered for this event today. And I encourage you to join us or one of the other partners of Rock Creek Park or National Capital Parks East in one of the many fabulous volunteer opportunities that are available in the parks, or recreational opportunities. We'll be partying at Fort Circle Park on Thursday evening from 5 to 8, and again, in a location to be determined near the center of Rock Creek Park on the morning of Saturday, August 14th for a modern day summer in the park. So we hope to see all of you there, if not on the trails sooner. And again, Julia, Tara, and Mrs. Ellard, thank you so much for everything you do, but particularly for your care and stewardship of Rock Creek Park. Have a wonderful evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us.